Hello, my name is Dr. Tom Graves, and I'm a family physician in New Baltimore, Michigan, a small town about 45 minutes north of Detroit. I love being a family doctor, and I love that Curtis asked me to speak to you about one of the coolest subjects I've ever heard of, angels and antibodies. In so many ways, angels and antibodies do the same thing. They protect us from harm, often when we aren't even aware that a threat is present. In many ways, angels and antibodies remind me of Star Wars. When a threat emerges, angels and antibodies are released to save us. Like our antibodies, guardian angels are always working behind the scenes. They protect us from evil and physical harm, if doing so would help accomplish God's purposes for our life. In a similar way, our antibodies work behind the scenes. Our antibodies, which along with our T cells and B cells, comprise our immune system. Some people would call this our adaptive immune system because it responds to invading pathogens, or what the body would call bad guys, kind of like the coronavirus that causes COVID-19. This battle goes on in our body every single day. Sometimes it's against major invaders like COVID, and interestingly, our body fights minor foes as well. There's a bug that all of us are exposed to every day called pneumocystis, and it's a fungus that our body just easily gets rid of, just doesn't even think about it. But if we have a compromised immune system, something that we call someone who is immunocompromised, and this would be especially true of someone who had HIV and AIDS, this trivial fungus can kill you. And early on in the AIDS epidemic, we saw people dying from pneumocystis more than anything else, a bug that 99.999% of people easily get rid of. But if you don't have functioning antibodies, you can't get rid of it, and it kills you. Our antibodies have great memory, and in many cases, a lifetime of memory. Very often, we're infected with a virus that our immune system has faced before, and our antibodies have remained and fight that virus, even though we may not have any symptoms at all. And many of us think that's why people who were exposed to COVID-19, that coronavirus, had no symptoms. It was likely they were exposed to other coronaviruses, the ones that just cause colds, and so that when they were exposed to the coronavirus that causes COVID-19, they were able to easily fight it. So there are 5 classes of antibodies in our body, and each one has its own territory to fight for us. Please note that there are 2 names for antibodies. One is antibody, the other is immunoglobulin. So when we recall the 5 classes of antibodies, we'll use the name immunoglobulin, but it's the same thing. So there's IgA, or antibody A, and that's like our Coast Guard. It gets all the outside bugs, and it attacks before they invade into our body. So we have these in our nose, our mouth, our respiratory tract, our gut, and our urinary tract. And another one that we have is IgE, and this one binds to allergens. So if, for example, you are having horrible allergies and I took your blood, I could measure your IgE, and we would expect that to be very high. It also works against parasitic worms. There's a third immunoglobulin or antibody called IgM, and I love these guys. They're the first responders. Like, you get infected with COVID-19 and IgM comes first. They recognize the infection and they don't hang around very long, but they also trigger the body to make the 4th type of antibody, which is IgG. IgG comes later, but it sticks around for a long time, and both IgM and IgG work inside the body, mostly in the blood. And the last one is maybe a little bit less known, IgD, and it works as a receptor on beta cells to help them detect foreign invaders in our body. So many people became interested in antibodies because of COVID and the pandemic. And we tell our patients that those of you that get a COVID antibody test, if it's positive, you definitely had COVID. But if it's negative, we don't know what to do with that. You may have had COVID, and for whatever reason, the antibody test doesn't show up positive, or you may not have had COVID. The antibody test that you get for COVID does not help us understand what level of protection you have from getting reinfected. In other words, you may have a lot of antibodies, but still be quite vulnerable to getting reinfected. And the last question I get a lot about antibodies and COVID, especially these days, are monoclonal antibodies. So an antibody is a protein that is naturally produced by our immune system in response to an infection. A monoclonal antibody is a molecule that's made in a laboratory, and it is designed to enhance our immune system. And it's really a beautiful invention because it can be made specifically against a certain invader like COVID-19. So they are very helpful. Many of our patients have gone to the hospital and had these and just had a phenomenal response from going very sick to not very sick. And they improve the survival in patients with COVID-19. So Curtis is going to talk a lot more about angels and antibodies, and there's a lot of great information. I think it's a wonderful topic, and I'm thrilled that you are exploring this with us. So God bless you, and thank you for listening.